That's a great idea, and this is probably very effective, but we will never get RSA in, say, 512 bytes. If we need 5 kilobytes, that's really a lot more expensive. So, but there are alternatives. The alternative, well, one alternative would be not to use a signature, but to use a hash. That is, to use a checksum over the complete flash. The problem of the checksum is that there's no way to update the Windows kernel in Flash ROM on later revisions of the Xbox without also updating the Southbridge chips. Because any new revision would not be accepted because the checksum is, of course, different. But what we can do is we can introduce another link in our chain of trust, which will hash, well, the secret ROM will just hash a second bootloader, 2BL. And the second bootloader can be of any size. And this second bootloader, which is in Flash and which is hashed and must be authentic then, can then use RSA to check the integrity of the kernel. So this looks pretty secure. We cannot change 2BL anymore, but we don't need to. But we can update the kernel. Now, what does our secret ROM have to do? I told you it has to verify the integrity of the second bootloader, 2BL, with a hash. It has to pass control to the 2BL if everything is okay. But it also has to decrypt 2BL. And 2BL will, in turn, also decrypt the kernel. Because the whole flash, it would be a good idea if the whole flash was encrypted. So it makes attackers, it makes it a lot harder for attackers to see any code and to find any vulnerabilities if they don't see the code. So we should really have it encrypted in the chip. But in order to decrypt it, well, where would we store it? We would have to store it in RAM. And RAM is definitely not stable at this point if you turn on the Xbox, and after 20 cycles or so, RAM is certainly not stable for one simple reason. Microsoft bought RAM chips by Samsung, and they took all RAM chips that Samsung could deliver, not just the good ones, also the faulty ones. The faulty ones is these that don't do the 200 megahertz, but they're only stable at 180. So some Xboxes run with a memory at a slower clock frequency than others. So we really do have to make a stress test at the beginning to check how good the RAM is, perhaps depending on the temperature, and only after that we can really do something with RAM. But the question is, will all this, including the memory stress test, fit in something like 512 bytes? And that's obviously not possible. But we can put some of the code that has to be executed outside of these 512 bytes. We could, of course, have a large chunk of code in flash memory and just call it and make the memory initialization, jump back into the secret code and do all the crypto stuff. But this would be against all the security features because anyone can change the flash ROM. So we must not execute anything from flash ROM as long as it is not verified. The idea is to use a virtual machine which can do computer initialization. That virtual machine looks about like that on the right. It's a big while loop which can interpret several commands that can do all this. It can read and write from memory, which it needs for memory initialization. It can access ports, I/O ports, that is. It can do PCI config cycles, that is clock RAM down, and it can do some calculations and if-then and loops. This language has been called by hackers lately the Xcodes, and it's a really neat way to move code out of these 512 bytes into flash ROM without compromising security. So our memory initialization in Xcode language would look like this. We have that poke PCI that sets memory frequency to 200 megahertz. Then we would store something in memory, read it back, check whether it is okay. If okay, go to end. If not, try it again with 195. That's exactly how these Xcodes would work. But that's additional complexity for the whole system. So we should really have some thoughts about what people could do with that virtual machine. What if that secret ROM that we put into the Southbridge gets eventually revealed? Then people understand how to write these Xcodes themselves. So we must really make sure, because the Xbox are not verified for integrity, we can't just do all that in 512 bytes of code. We must make sure that nobody does anything nasty with the Xcodes. And there are several attacks that should be quite obvious. The first one is we could dump the secret ROM. So if someone has some clue how the Xcodes already work, the Xcodes can be used to read all that the secret ROM, which is mapped into memory at the very top, at the top of 512 bytes, and put it out at a very slow port, like the I2C port, for example, and sniff it there. So that's a quite effective attack to read the 512 bytes, which must not be revealed. And it is done by masking the high addresses. So every time you read from memory, or I think even write from memory, write to memory, the upper 4 bits will be cleared. So we can effectively only access the lower 256 megabyte of the address space, which is okay for memory initialization because we only have 64. So there is no way for the Xcodes to access the secret ROM and dump it somewhere. A second attack would be to turn off the secret ROM. With the secret ROM there lying over the flash. But what if the secret ROM gets turned off? Then the code that is just executing inside the secret ROM would fall down into flash. And that would be a quite bad thing. And that's exactly the statement that does this, because the chipset has the functionality to turn off the ROM for reasons I'm going to explain later. And we must make sure that Xcodes can never disable the ROM, or else we would fall down into untrusted flash, which is a bit like this picture here. Because this code will turn it off, we will fall down, yeah. And we must check for this code. And this is done by this code here. Every time we do a poke PCI, we test whether it's really that single instruction. And if it is, then we clear that bit that would turn off the ROM. So that poke PCI will have no effect. Okay, let's talk about decryption and hashing. We must now, after memory initialization and all that virtual machine stuff, we must think about a way to decrypt and also checksum or hash the kernel that is stored in the untrusted external flash memory. And we need an effective, working, and really small algorithm. There are really small algorithms like those that have a secret key. This will be expanded to a seed. And this seed can generate a key stream. And this key stream, every single byte of this key stream will be XORed with the ciphertext we have in flash memory, and we get the plain text output. That's how RC4 and RC5, for example, do it. And there can be one additional property of these, that we have feedback of the data that gets decrypted into the seed. What happens then is that if, for example, we have a different ciphertext for one single byte, then the plain text will, of course, be changed. But because of the feedback, the whole key stream afterwards will also be different than before. And therefore, the whole plain text that comes out at the other side will also be different. So what this feedback gives us is that if you change a single byte, then the complete decryption will be altered. And even until the last few bytes, they all will also be different if you change a single byte. So what we get is we get a hash for free. All we have to check is whether the last few bytes are the same or have been changed. So that's a pretty neat way to combine decryption and hashing in a single algorithm if we have this feedback functionality. Now, what do we do if the flash is not correct? What if the flash check fails? We must panic in some way. We must blink the LED. We must not turn off the Xbox because the user wouldn't know what has happened if it really is a fault. We must blink the LEDs in some way to communicate. And obviously, we must hold the CPU, and we must also disable the secret ROM. That's why there is the functionality of disabling the secret ROM, because an attacker could just make that hash fail so that the Xbox deliberately panics and while it panics and is turned on, someone could attach extra hardware to read that data, which is a lot easier than sniffing a bus. So secret ROM must be disabled. So how can we panic? That's a problem, because how would you crash a car while the motor is off? The problem is, we could turn off the CPU and then turn off the secret ROM. But if we turn off the CPU, who can turn off the secret ROM? And on the other hand, if we turn off the secret ROM, then the CPU, where would the code be to turn off, to hold the CPU? So we have a real problem there. And Microsoft was very, very creative to solve this problem. That is, we drive just against the top of memory. That's the top of memory, that's the last few instructions that can fit there. And we just put these instructions that turn off the secret ROM at the very top of memory of our address space. So what does the CPU do if it goes against the very top of that? There's a barrier there. There will be a double fault, according to the data sheets, and the CPU will be halted. So we have both. We have turned it off and we have halted it because it ran against the end of memory. Okay, let's summarize the security system. What we do, we have that secret ROM, which is inside the south bridge. It is hard to sniff, and is not possible to replace it. It is not possible to override or overwrite that secret ROM at least, and it's very hard to dump. It first must initialize RAM with this Xcode technology, which is stored in Flash, but which is secured. We have looked at all the cases that are possible attacks. And it must decrypt and hash the 2BL and panic if something goes wrong. Okay, now put off your standard glasses and put on your sunglasses. We are now the hackers. Okay, now we have an Xbox and we know nothing about it. And there is someone, Bunny, who first, of course, dumped the flash ROM. Put it online, got a call from Microsoft's lawyers, and put it offline again. Okay, Bunny looked, of course, at that ROM and looked where the x86 would start, at that very top address, -16. The question is now, what did he see? What was there at the upper 512 bytes of his flash ROM? What should there be? Zeros? Interestingly, no. What Bunny saw was the upper 212 bytes of flash contain a virtual machine that can do many interesting things. It has decryption and hash code, RC5. It has panic code. But still, if he changed it, nothing happened. Of course, he found out that this was not the real thing that he was editing. These 412 bytes had no effect whatsoever because there was some secret ROM. And this code didn't work. The key was wrong. Something was wrong there. It looked quite okay, but it didn't do anything. Well, Bunny, it was obvious for Bunny that the CPU didn't boot off this flash, although there was code there, and there had to be a secret ROM somewhere. So he sniffed the hypertransport bus and eventually had the 512 bytes of secret code. And in this secret code he saw there also was a virtual machine, RC4 decryption and hash code, panic code. Well, but the 2BL is hashed. Now what can we do? Let's look at how this RC5 algorithm that we spoke about earlier looks like. We have the secret key, the seed, and it makes that key stream, which will, if you change a single byte, will change the complete key stream. If we have that feedback. RC5 has that feedback. RC4 does not. And the secret ROM uses RC4. So if a single byte gets changed, then only that byte gets changed in the plain text. But the key stream does not get changed, and the last few bytes also are the same. So effectively, you can't use RC4 as a hash. So there was no hash. They had some code which would do the decryption, which worked, and which looked like it would do a hash, but it didn't. We also had the